Record to the cloud. Okay, we're recording now, and I will start letting them in. Here we go.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I think we're just going to go ahead and wait for a few more people to go ahead and enter the room. And then what we'll do is get started in just a moment.
I hope everyone is doing well today. I know that certainly in Montana we have challenges with the weather, and I know some parts of the country are getting deluged with rain, and boy, that's something we sure could use up here. So hope everybody's doing okay. We got a great program today. And if any of you guys are listening, I encourage everyone, if you have any questions, you can submit them using the chat function on Zoom. Also, if you want, feel free to just raise your hand, and Brianna's, as our moderator, will help us try to get to everyone's questions or comments at the end as time permits. So with that, welcome. I'm going to queue up the slides so I can get started in a timely manner, as they say. Thank you, Brianna.
You're welcome. You kind of took the intro from me. Let's get started.
Oh, we'll let you go. Yeah, I'll let you go ahead and run with that, because it always takes me a few seconds to get everything
All right.
going here.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar today. This is part of an ongoing webinar series exploring the practical applications of culinary medicine, taking it from the classroom into your kitchen. My name is Brianna Niekamp. I'm the online marketing coordinator at the University of Montana, and I will be helping to facilitate our session today. Just to give you a brief overview of what to expect, we'll go ahead and introduce our speaker, then we'll get into big pot blanching, which is where the real fun begins. If time permits, at the end of our session, we'll open the floor for questions. Please make sure to use that hand raise function if you do have a question at the end, as well as Mike so elegantly put earlier. So if you do have a different question, please locate the chat feature icon at the bottom of your screen and enter your question there. We'll do our best to answer all of your questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. He's a cardiologist, professional chef, author, and college professor. Please welcome Dr. Michael Finster.
Thank you, Brianna. Hey, you can see the slides, right? We're all set up and good?
Yes, sir. We're good to go.
All righty. Great. Hello to everyone. Welcome to our Practical Culinary Medicine webinar for this month of July. I am Chef Dr. Mike, and as you can see today, we are going to chat about big pot blanching. You'll hear me mention that a lot because I just like to say it. It's pretty cool. But before we get started, I do want to take a few minutes to cover some quick housekeeping. Firstly, let me thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your schedules to be with us here today. We certainly appreciate your interest, support, and participation in all aspects of our culinary medicine program. If this is something that speaks to you, or you're just curious to know more and have not already, please visit the website www.chefdrmike.com. Again, that's chefdrmike.com, where you can learn all about culinary medicine, peruse the blogs, information, recipes, the recipes that we share here today. Brianna will be putting those in the chat. You can also obviously find them on the blog. Just go to the blog, and under that blogs tab, hit recipes, and the two that we will share with you today will come up. You can also learn more about the course we offer here at the University of Montana. The Introduction to Culinary Medicine course we teach at the university is a 100% online opportunity. For medical professionals, it qualifies for 36 level 1 CMEs. Those are the highest. And for culinary professionals, it qualifies you for 30 CEUs offered by the American Culinary Federation. But hey, folks, the important thing is you don't have to be a medical or culinary professional to take this course or enjoy it. One of our fundamental founding principles in culinary medicine is that it is for anyone and everyone. Ultimately, you determine the culinary medicine approach that's right for you, because culinary medicine is all about empowering you as an individual to reestablish, reforge, and reconnect your personal relationship with the food you eat. And that means using simple techniques like big pot blanching to elevate your food game. If you can boil water, folks, you can do this. It's that easy. Before we dig into the details of the techniques and applications itself, I'd like to take a moment and step back to see how this functions in the context of what we're really trying to do with the ingredients that we have. And that is simply make them delicious. We love delicious food. That's the foundation of where we start in culinary medicine. We take wonderfully authentic, wholesome, and flavorful ingredients and prepare and present them in a way that yields maximum enjoyment. And for the purpose of our discussion today, I'd like to start with a brief inquiry into flavor, taste, and texture. Now, we're all familiar with the taste of foods, which involves both our sense of smell and our sense of taste. But there's another component that contributes to the flavor of food, if you will, and that is often overlooked. And that component is the texture aspect of the ingredients in the dishes we prepare. And in some ways, texture can be approached in almost the opposite perspective from how we compose the taste of a dish. So when we talk about taste, we're looking to find a balance between things like salty, sweet, acid, and perhaps the heat or spice of the various ingredients. When it comes to taste, our objective is really about balance. But when we talk about texture, what we're really looking for are contrast. It's really a simple concept to understand. If you want to experience failure of textures, at least for the grown-ups in the room, eat some baby food. It's quite often, very singular in taste, very monochromatic. It has this homogeneous puree-like consistency, and most of us will find that very unpalatable in terms of an entire meal. And these are exactly the things we want to avoid. And we can do that through simple manipulation of things like the appearance of the dish, the consistency of the dish, and the feel of the dish. So, in terms of culinary technique, from a strictly flavor perspective, Big Pot Blanching gives us a tool to help us craft the aspects of texture we might desire in a particular dish. So, for example, when we Big Pot Blanch our green vegetables, excuse me, we can often increase their visual appeal. There's a natural barrier that exists between the chlorophyll contained in our green vegetables and the surface of the plant. And blanching removes some of the plant's tissue gases and then highlights and accentuates their natural green vibrancy. Blanching also stops the action of certain enzymes, which can cause loss of flavor and color. And so the result of big pot blanching is that our vegetables look more delicious. And as the saying goes, we eat first with our eyes. Blanching can also change the consistency and mouthfeel of different vegetables and allows us to address the different components of some vegetables when we look at things like leaves versus stems, or in the case of broccoli, something like florets. So, with that being said, what do we need to get started with big pot blanching? Well, we need a big pot and we need to get it on the boil. One of the most important things about this technique is to have a really big pot and a really vigorous boil, often referred to as a roiling or rolling boil. If we have a lot of salt water that is at a roiling boil, when we add our vegetables, that water is going to be able to continue the boil, and that is maintain a constant temperature. This is really one of the few critical components of big pot blanching. It's really a simple thing to do if we pay attention to just a few key steps, and this is one of them. Because if that water temperature drops and the time it takes for the water to come back up to the boil, we can easily overcook our vegetables. Then you're left with those mushy, insipid, and drab green beans that resemble something that you probably had on a school lunch tray. And I will say with some degree of confidence, that is not what any of us would consider good eats. So, making sure that we have lots of salted water and we maintain a vigorous rolling boil is one of the few simple technical steps that is nonetheless critical for success. In addition to our big pot of salted water, we need only a few other pieces of common kitchen equipment. We need salt to create salted water, of course. We need tongs or a spider or a slotted spoon, whatever you have handy that you can use to safely remove the very hot vegetables from the boiling water. We will need an ice bath, which is just a large bowl of ice water, to shock our vegetables once we remove them from the pot. We will also need something like a paring knife because this is how we will test in terms of time how long we need to big pot blanch our vegetables to achieve our desired consistency. And in addition to simply manipulating the texture aspect of certain ingredients, big pot blanching is an important tool in our culinary medicine toolbox. It's especially useful for us during this time of year because we really want to use big pot blanching with our green leafy vegetables. As a general rule, things that grow above the ground, which we can find in abundance in our gardens and at our farmers market during the spring and summer months, are the vegetables that we want to blanch. And that is, we want to immerse them into the boiling water. In general, things that grow under the ground, like potatoes and turnips, are things that we actually want to start that cooking process in cold water and cook the vegetables as we reach a boil. In terms of a seasonal technique, big pot blanching is of particular utility during the spring and summer months that we have now, when we have access to these wonderfully fresh and delicious green leafy vegetables. We mentioned how the process of blanching increases the visual appeal of those vegetables. But from a practical standpoint, blanching also cleanses the surface of dirt and organisms, and it helps prevent the loss of important vitamins, minerals, and other healthful compounds. And because we're cooking in salted water, we're also seasoning our vegetables and making them even more delicious. Now, I wanted to take a moment and point out that you can see the firmness and resistance that we have in our broccoli stem before we blanch it by using the paring knife. The vegetable is quite resistant to just some gentle pressure applied with the point of a paring knife. And this is what we'd expect from a piece of raw, crisp broccoli stem. During the summer season, when many of us have access to such an abundance and variety of green leafy vegetables, utilizing big pot blanching helps us focus in on some of the core principles and application in culinary medicine, like the zero waste kitchen approach. As we alluded to earlier, when we subject our green leafy vegetables to big pot blanching, we can inactivate certain enzymes. And in this way, we can help extend the shelf life of our vegetables so that we can utilize them over a longer period of time before they start to go bad. Big pot blanching can also be useful before you freeze or can your vegetables for much the same reason. And this translates into being able to purchase such vegetables in season and in bulk when they're often both at their most delicious and their most inexpensive. So in this way, we're cutting down waste and thus also saving ourselves some money on the back end. And when we can utilize these vegetables in season, we not only get to enjoy these wonderful fresh flavors, but we often get to purchase them much more cheaply, thus saving ourselves money on the front end. And when we purchase ingredients in bulk like this, we can utilize a par cooking technique like big pot blanching to help prepare them for later use. And that means we can also end up saving ourselves significant amounts of time, and we can build in convenience for ourselves. So to give you an example, I'll often big pot blanch some Swiss chard. I love Swiss chard, which runs the whole spring and summer season. Now I'll do the stems and the leaves separately so that when I finish, the leaves and the stems are part cooked to an equivalent level of doneness. Then, for example, either later that evening or even later in the week, I can simply saute the leaves and stems up in a couple of minutes, and you have this fantastic and flavorful accompaniment to any busy midweek meal. One of the questions that arises when we do such big pot blanching is, well, how long do I have to blanch the vegetables? Now, ultimately, this really depends on personal preference. It will depend on the vegetable, the part of the vegetable that you're blanching. I just mentioned both the leaves and the stems of Swiss chard, and the type of consistency you're looking to achieve. For example, in the 1970s, there was a trend in the culinary approach known as Nouvelle Cuisine to blanch vegetables extremely quickly. Essentially, what you got on your plate were these teeny tiny portions of food. For example, with a single green bean cut into three pieces that looked really vibrant and appetizing, but tasted very firm and raw. And personally, for me, that's not really a texture that appeals to me in that context. And that's not what I really want to achieve if I'm going through the effort of big pot blanching. What I like to look for is what you can see here. You can see how the tip of that paring knife slides through the vegetables with very little resistance. You notice that the broccoli stem here isn't limp and overcooked. It's still firm and vibrant, but it is yielding easily to the paring knife. And for me, this is what I really like to achieve when I'm pig, big pot blanching things like broccoli stems or Swiss chard stems or kale stems, whatever. I look for that little bit of tooth, that little bit of residual firmness that's surrounded by a wonderfully creamy and pleasant bite. Um, if that works for you, that's great. But at the end of the day, you will need to experiment and experience a little bit exactly what it is that works for you. And we just talked about utilizing the technique of big pot blanching for our vegetables in bulk. And of course, if we're heating up and maintaining a boil on a lot of water, we want to maximize our efficiency and reduce our waste by doing as many vegetables at once as we can. So how much can we do at a time? And again, much like personal preference, there really isn't a strict answer for this because it will depend upon the vegetables and the parts of the vegetables. For example, the stems versus leaves, the size of the pod, etc. What I recommend is that if you're going to err on the side of adding less vegetables to the pot. And this is because, as we mentioned earlier, I would emphasize here the critical thing, one of the few critical steps in big pot blanching is to maintain that aggressive boil. And you've heard me several times today already mention salted water. So the natural question that comes up is, of course, how much salt? Well, obviously that will depend on the size of the pot you use and how much water you fill it with. And in all honesty, I find that the exact amount of salt isn't critical. What I do is heat up the water that I have and add enough salt so that it's salty to the taste. When you taste it, it should remind you of the ocean. And at that point, you've added enough salt so that as you begin the cooking process, you'll also begin to appropriately season the vegetables as they cook. And this is very important, particularly if you're blanching something like asparagus spears and perhaps you're going to save them as part of a cold dish or an appetizer later. So by seasoning as we big pot blanch, you can immediately use our vegetables and they will taste phenomenal as part of a cold dish to be served later. If you were to do this in unseasoned water and then try to season the asparagus later, it's not going to come out the same. And speaking of cold, it's time to shock the vegetables. Along with maintaining the boil, this is probably the other critical component in the big pot blanching process. Shocking serves a very important function and involves removing our vegetables from the boiling water and then placing them immediately in a bowl of ice water. By placing the vegetables immediately into this ice water, we arrest or stop the cooking process. And this preserves our green vegetables at the exact point of doneness where we want them. If we don't properly shock our vegetables, the residual heat that's present after removing them from the boiling water will actually continue to cook the vegetables. And the end result would be overcooked, mushy, drab, and limpid vegetables instead of the bright green and pleasingly tender vegetables that is really what we want on our plate. Shocking allows us to prepare our vegetables for later use, and that's part of our mise en place approach that we've covered in some other webinars. I mentioned previously as an example where I could prepare some Swiss chard leaves and stems in advance by big pot blanching, and then later quickly saute them in a minute or two as part of a busy weeknight dinner. And that's an example of preparing things ahead and then using and incorporate them in that mise en place approach. If you are big pot blanching something like the asparagus spears that I also just mentioned, you could do a big batch and you could save some to prepare later, perhaps something like a side dish that you quickly saute up with some balsamic vinegar reduction. And then you could also put some aside, or even use some that you've just shocked and serve them immediately with something like a yogurt and dill dressing that is, again, a wonderful cold dish that can be so refreshing and satisfying as part of a cuisine that we serve in the heat of summer. So I think you can begin to see at this point the versatility in utilizing the summer bounty of fantastic fresh vegetables that big pot blanching can give us. Summer is the time when we can enjoy light and lovely salads. However, all too often, our salads, whether we're making them to sell or making them ourselves, or we're going out to get them somewhere, it seems like it's always those same 4 or 5 vegetables served raw with often the same dressing. But by using big pot blanching, you could add, for example, tender and bright asparagus spears to a salad. You can completely transform that same old broccoli pasta salad by using a combination of crunchy, fresh, and raw florets, and then tender, creamy, big pot blanch stems. We can add our cooled big pot blanch vegetables to a warm or wilted salad, and then we create a textural contrast through the use and manipulation of temperatures. Once we begin to understand what we can accomplish and how we can transform our vegetables with this very, very simple and basic technique, we begin to see that there's innumerable possibilities. And as we begin to wrap up today's program, I'll share with you one of those possibilities. I'm going to walk you through creating a lovely broccoli ripassati, which is a very simple Italian broccoli sauce. And if you look in the chat, Brianna will put that link up for you, and you can use that at your leisure. And just so you know, there's as many versions of this as there are Italian nonnas. And you'll see versions of the sauce that are quite chunky and more resemble a broccoli saute, as well as versions that are quite broken down and homogeneous, so much so they actually almost resemble a broccoli puree. For me, I like to shoot for something that's in between and that utilizes the concept of texture that we've been talking about today. There are some smooth and creamy elements as well as chunks of tender vegetable. Many of the recipes also call for using only the broccoli florets, but as I'll show you today, one of the things I love about this recipe, and particularly using big pot blanching, is that we can utilize all the parts of the broccoli. We can use the leaves, the stems, and the florets. And in fact, if you prefer to reserve the florets for another occasion or another dish, you could actually do a version of the sauce using the stems and leaves only. And the stems and leaves are something that a lot of people simply toss into the bin. So to prepare the sauce, we're going to big pot blanch the stems, florets, and leaves separately, as they require different times, just as we've been talking about today. For the stems and florets, I'm looking for that paring knife to slide through with little to no resistance. For the leaves, I'm simply going to quickly blanch them for about a minute or two until they turn vibrant and they're very tender. And then we're going to cool everything quickly in an ice bath, and remember to remove the components as soon as they are cool. You don't want to let them sitting there for hours in the ice water where they can become waterlogged and start to really lose that critical flavor component. You also want to reserve some of the blanching liquid for this recipe. When I'm ready to prepare the sauce, whenever that is, I heat up a saucepan with some olive oil and I season that with some sliced garlic and chilies. You can also add some anchovy fillets, which I find are a lovely addition. And you won't really taste the addition of one or two small anchovy fillets in terms of a fishy flavor, but what they do add is a sense of umami or a deep, rich, savory flavor. They add that to the sauce because of the glutamate compounds that they contribute. And once the oil is seasoned, you can remove the garlic and chilies if you like. Then we're going to add the broccoli to the pan along with some of the reserved blanching liquid, and we're going to allow that to cook down for several minutes over a medium heat. You can use a wooden spoon, just start stirring the broccoli in the pan, and it should start to begin to break down. And you can just continue to stir this mixture until it reaches the consistency you like. Alternatively, if you properly big pot blanch the components, you can also easily break them up by just using an immersion blender. However, if you're going to do this, I recommend using it quite judiciously because they've been big pot blanched. It's going to become very easy to blend everything quickly into a fine liquid, and then you're going to wind up with kind of that homogeneous broccoli puree instead of a proper sauce. And after we do that, we simply continue the process until you've achieved the sauce consistency that you like. As I mentioned, I like some bits of the broccoli broken down to the consistency of a creamy sauce while also leaving tender chunks of vegetable scattered throughout so that we have those textural contrasts that we've talked about today. If you find your sauce is too thick, simply add a little more of the reserved blanching liquid to achieve, again, the consistency that works best for you. And do remember to season as you go, as you're cooking the sauce. This broccoli ripassati makes a lovely light and summer pasta dish. Here, I've tossed our broccoli ripassati with, which, as you recall, actually only contains broccoli, seasoned olive oil, water, and salt with some pasta. Here I've used some farfalle, but you can use whatever pasta that's your favorite. I've added some really good olive oil. And folks, here's where you want to spend that extra money when you're drizzling like this to use that really good, high quality, high flavor extra virgin olive oil. I've also added some freshly grated Parmesan Reggiano, and I've also added a squeeze of fresh lemon juice, which adds a few citrus notes, but importantly adds some acidity. And it brings that taste to the dish of balance that we talked about achieving at the beginning of the webinar today. And this gives you a wonderful vegetarian main dish as it is. Obviously, you can use it as a side or combine it with something else as you like. And as a further and final example of how versatile big pot blanching can be, this is an absolutely stunner, showstopper, scrumptious, and stunning cold appetizer that was made from the broccoli ripassati. It is a broccoli ripassati con gorgonzola e pomodoro. And to make this, we took the broccoli mixture, or broccoli sauce, and then simply combined it with some chunks of real creamy and intense gorgonzola blue cheese. We popped that in a ring mold and left it alone to set for a few hours in the fridge. To serve, we surround it with some fresh crushed tomatoes. They bring not only their flavor, but again, some of that acidity we've been talking about that works so well with the cheese and creamy broccoli, as well as adding some microgreens that add some tender herbal type notes. And we top the dish specifically with fennel, which works incredibly well with the combination of vegetables and is just a partner in the taste of crime, the crime of taste, if you will, with the tomato. And also added some red sorrel leaves, which add a light counterpoint of some sourness. Now, if you don't have sorrel, you could certainly once again just use a little fresh lemon juice. So I know this has been a bit of a whirlwind, but I hope today you've seen how using a technique as simple as boiling salted water can open up a whole new door of culinary possibilities and allows us to expand and experience that wonderful bounty of summer vegetables at a whole new level. So with that, I know I'm going to stop our screen share and I will go ahead and start our video, and I'm going to come back from the darkness into the light, and there we are. So I don't know if there are any questions, Brianna.
Currently see no questions, but if you
Okay.
do have them, please use the hand raise function or put them in the chat and Mike and I can see those.
And also, if you have any questions that are coming up as you practice and experience culinary medicine, and there's something that you'd like us to do a webinar, you can also pop that in the chat. You can email that to us from the website, and we're happy to take questions there and happy to take any requests for anything that you need that we can assist you with on your journey into culinary medicine. And if there are no other questions, then thanks so much, everybody. Have a great weekend that's coming on up, and we will see you next month.